All right, hey there guys. Today we're going to be taking a look at just some of the Black Friday deals that are happening right now on Amazon. Last time we took a look at what mini PC deals they had. Right now I'm just going to take a look at in general what they have. Today's Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving. I'm pretty much just going to be shopping for any Christmas gifts that I might be looking to buy for some people. So I'm going to see what kind of deals are available in general. We saw that in terms of mini PCs, there really wasn't that many great options. There were at least no really major standout deals, but that does mean that if you were in the market to buy a mini PC, now is as good a time as any to buy. But as I said, there's really no standout deals here, though I will say that this $50 coupon for the Geekom AE8 with the Ryzen 7 8845HS is actually pretty rock solid. While it doesn't have a 1TB SSD, that is 32GB of RAM, and I can attest to the fact that Geekom actually has some very well built mini PCs. These are the closest things that I've ever used to the Nooks themselves made by Intel. There's just an extra level of attention to detail that they really go through here that just kind of makes the experience of using these devices noticeably better. One of the biggest downsides of Geekom is that a lot of times their mini PCs end up being more expensive than their competitors, and even though they do have a higher level of build quality, a lot of the times it's not really worth the extra $100 to $200 premium that they charge. But recently with their AMD systems, they're actually very competitively priced, and because of that, they're a lot easier to recommend. Like I said, these are built very well, and if you've ever been looking for a mini PC that kind of fills that Nook experience that was always only on the Intel side of things, this is about as good as it gets. But as I said, a lot of these mini PCs really remain at insanely high prices, and it's really more towards the mid to low tier price points that you actually start to see things that are more reasonable. By the way, just because I've seen that more than 500 people have bought this, I don't recommend you get this mini PC. It's nothing to do specifically with this model, as this chassis has been used with other systems, but it's the fact that this is the one with the Celeron N5105. Even though this is a very heavily discounted thing where you can stack a lot of coupons here and get this at a very low price, trust me, you don't want to be on this platform. The N5105 is a Jasper Lake series processor, so it is quite old at this point, going back to 2021. So that means you're using some pretty dated hardware that at this point is pretty out of date, especially considering that the Alder Lake N series that replaced it is noticeably better in terms of raw performance. Because at least if you get a N100, and I don't really recommend getting an N100 unless you're really trying to go for the cheapest possible level of performance, this is about the bare minimum here, because you get 4 cores with 4 threads, so no hyper-threading whatsoever, but you actually do get pretty decent IPC because this is Alder Lake. This ends up performing very similar to an i5 from the 6th generation and 7th generation. And while those generations are quite old at this point, this is a big improvement for these low-end processors, where a lot of the times they still end up being far slower than high-performance parts from even 5 years ago. In this case, you are getting essentially the same single core performance as someone would get with a i5 6400, but it's also on a very low power chip. And one of its biggest benefits is actually the fact that the iGPU on here is actually decently powerful for what it is. And I don't necessarily mean powerful in the sense that you're going to be playing games on it or anything like that. It's more that the iGPU in there supports modern codecs, so you get hardware acceleration in a wide variety of apps, and it tends to work better than these older generations of integrated graphics. So these coupons here really aren't even doing anything, because when I get this into my cart, the lowest it goes down to is $130. So this right here, it's just not worth it. If you're looking to spend this much money, just get the GMK Tech G3. It's $125.98 right now, and you get a coupon with it. This ends up being cheaper, There's just no reason to go with it. I will say Geekom also has their A7 mini PC with the Ryzen 9 7940HS, and that's 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 2 terabyte SSD for $600. This is actually a pretty great deal. I haven't tried this specific chassis for them though, so I can't speak to just how good the cooling performance is on here, but at least the specs that it has are really decent for the price. I actually have a Geekom mini PC right here that I actually had set up, and this is just a very budget orientated one that they have. It is their Air 12 Lite, and this is rocking an Alder Lake N100 processor. And I've taken a look at a lot of these N100 Alder Lake N series mini PCs, but this is the best built one that I have ever taken a look at. It is such nice construction, feels so well put together. This is, again, the kind of quality that has been missing ever since the Nook series from Intel has essentially gone away. Geekom is the company that has kept that legacy alive because they've been making Nooks pretty much alongside Intel since the beginning. It's just so well put together. Okay, that was mini PC. So let's see what they have in terms of tablets. I'm just curious to see what prices they have for things like iPad. Top thing is the iPad 9th gen is $280 for the 256 gigabyte model. Decent amount of storage, like that is a good amount of storage for sure. But man, it is pretty old at this point. Like, I mean, if we compare it to the iPad 10th gen, we're looking at here, you know, like slight differences in terms of the display. For sure, the display on the iPad 10th gen is better. My mother has the iPad 9th gen, and side by side, they are actually different. There is an improvement with the 10th gen, but I just don't know how long the A13 is going to continue to get updates versus the A14. They are very similar to each other though. It's definitely not the worst thing in the world, but really one of the biggest downsides of the iPad 9th gen is the fact that you're stuck with Lightning. USB-C is so incredibly nice because with Lightning, you're very limited to what you can do with the iPad, because with the iPad 10th gen, you can hook up a USB-C dock to it and you can get display out, you can get a headphone jack, you can get USB ports so you can connect things like external storage or even use USB devices on it. I'm noticing though that they don't have the iPad 10th gen on sale here, or at least listed here. Let's see how much these Samsung ones are. Oh, that is still a brutal price. Now here's the thing, I do like these Samsung tablets. My sister actually has the Galaxy Tab S7 Plus, and that has an AMOLED display that is absolutely gorgeous. She's pretty much had that tablet for years now, and the display on it still blows my mind when I look at it. It has aged so well, and it still is fast enough to do everything that she really wanted to do on there, which is mostly just watch content, and the display is great for that. But at this price point, this is pretty brutal. This is pretty brutal, especially because Samsung doesn't really have the same track record of long-term support of their products in the same way that Apple does. Not really seeing much of anything else that interesting here in terms of the tablet section. What's this? Had Air 4th gen, 64 gigabytes, renewed premium. Well, I just got burnt in terms of buying a renewed iPad from Amazon. I'm actually working on a video that'll probably be up tomorrow of me talking about that. But okay, the iPad Air 4th gen, the specs of that in comparison to the others, that's also the A14 processor. Now this is probably going to have a better display, but I really don't see much of a reason to get that over just getting the iPad 10th gen. I mean, like Walmart on their website shows that you can get the iPad 10th gen for $260. So I don't really see how this would be worth the $375 in all honesty. Like if it was an iPad Air with an M series processor, I could be convinced there, but that doesn't seem that great. The Google Pixel Tab, $280. Now this is an interesting product because really its biggest downside is the fact that it has that Tensor G2 processor. That wasn't exactly great when it came out, and I'm very curious how this has been aging because, I mean, being a Google product, you would expect it to at least get some level of first-class citizen type support, but that's not necessarily always been the case. I don't know if I'd be willing to gamble testing that out for $280 though. Yeah, okay, so even on Amazon they have the iPad 10th gen available for for $260, and it actually has a $10 coupon with it. Yeah, no, this is just so much better. This right here is actually an incredible deal. I will say though that there is a solid contender here with the new iPad mini available for $460 right now. That is a 128 gigabyte version. What makes this pretty great is the fact that A17 Pro processor, it's essentially getting treated in the same way that the M series processors get treated. So you're going to have access to all of those extra apps that are only available on the M series. So all the games and stuff like that. And it is a smaller device. Some people like tablets this small. Personally, I think that the iPad 10th gen is about the perfect size. So I think I would really only ever get the iPad Air 11-inch at most. But there is something to be said about the iPad mini's size, where it's compact enough that you can carry it anywhere and it's extremely lightweight while still having a bigger display than your phone. Though nothing else really stands out in terms of the tablet market, it makes sense. On Amazon, you're rarely going to find very interesting tablets. Most of the interesting tablets are available in overseas sites or just direct from manufacturers. For example, OnePlus's tablets, you're usually going to find better deals buying directly from them. Let's see, in terms of computer accessories, what do we have here? Let's look at computer components. What do we got in terms of components? Prices are going on here. Okay, 4 terabyte, not a great SSD for $200. This isn't really all that great of a price. I've used these Crucial BX500 series before. They're not great. They really start to slow down, and at $200, I just don't think that's worth it. This is just insanity to me. An 8 terabyte SSD for $600 actually being a deal is crazy, because for a long time the premium on these 8 terabyte SSDs was insanely high. I'm talking over $1,000 each. So the fact that this is $600 is things trending towards a better direction, though it's still not ideal. But I mean, if you want to go big baller and you have very limited amounts of NVMe slots, this is you maximizing your capacity there, and it's at least not in the territory where it's absolutely ridiculous to get it. When these were $1,200, you would be dumb to buy one of these. At $600, this is now more towards the range of, if you want to have a premium experience, you're going to pay a premium price, but it's not a ripoff anymore. Because at the end of the day, this is the densest capacity that you can get on one NVMe slot. There is some pretty major value to that, just not enough to make it as expensive as they used to be. This is within a reasonable range at this point. Now, please consider upgrading to 32 gigabytes of RAM if you're still on a mini PC that has only 16 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes of RAM is very cheap nowadays. And if you're on DDR4, it's even cheaper. Look at this. You can get 64 gigabytes of RAM, $80. This is crazy cheap in comparison to what this used to be. Like, think about this. You could have a mini PC with 16 threads and 64 gigabytes of RAM. All of that in a tiny little package, and you're not even paying a ridiculous sum of money. And especially if you're on the desktop side of things and you're still on 16 gigabytes, just upgrade to 32. Just upgrade to 32 gigabytes and be done with it. It'll extend the life of your system for just a little bit longer. Ride it out. It's a cheap enough upgrade that it's going to be worth your time. Just do it. And especially if you're on AM5, you should really just be on 32 gigabytes. There's no point in going with 16 gigabytes. On AM5, going with 16 gigabytes is like going with 8 gigabytes all the way back in 2017. It already was very questionable to do it then. Feel like it's like that right now, where it's not like you're going to have a bad experience with 16 gigabytes, but 32 gigabytes is just so much cheaper. And the way that Windows works really enjoys having access to a large amount of RAM, because it's constantly doing things in the background. Your RAM is pretty much always being utilized, which is exactly what you want. You don't want your memory to just sit there doing nothing. People kind of freak out a lot of the time. They'll open up Task Manager and they'll see that their RAM is being utilized and they'll freak out. That's normal. That's okay. You want to see that. You just don't necessarily want it to be happening with programs that you yourself don't really care about. But there's not really much you can do there in terms of dealing with that on Windows, but one of the easiest ways to combat that is to just have more memory. Give Windows all the memory that it needs and it'll be happy, and it won't really mess with any of your programs that you're actually trying to run. In terms of graphics cards though, there really doesn't seem to be any kind of standout deals. deals. I might just end up caving and buy an RX 7900 XTX. I really wanted to go with an AMD build because of the fact that I want to start doing more things with Linux. And just from the experience of trying to use Linux on a NVIDIA GPU on a laptop, I don't really want to ever have to deal with that. Open source drivers are just so much better. But I was really hoping to see the 7900 XTX start to hit a price point more towards around $800 at this point. I probably would have snagged one at that point, but these prices they're just brutal. They really are. They really are just brutal. And with the new generation coming out, I just don't expect prices to really start to get better in terms of GPUs. So I might just have to pick at some point to jump off the waiting train. One thing I actually do recommend is the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C wireless controller here. I have one of these laying around somewhere, but I cannot for the life of me find it right now. But these are pretty solid. I've enjoyed them. At least I like the HoloFX joysticks on them. And in general, they actually feel pretty high quality for the price point that they are. They come in some pretty funky colors, and honestly, I'm a fan of it, but you might not enjoy that yourself. But at the price point that it's at, it's honestly a big recommendation from me. One of the places that you're most likely to find a deal is looking at monitors, essentially. These are some of the things that I've seen the most consistent sales for. And me personally, I'm holding out for a sub $500 deal on an OLED. If you're ready to jump on the OLED bandwagon, at this point, there are so many very high quality panels that are sub $1,000. And if you're willing to take a risk with brands that have less than stellar warranties, you can get OLEDs all the way down to $500 to $600. Now, even MSI has the MAG 271QPX QD OLED 1440p 27-inch OLED display that goes all the way up to 360 hertz. You have that for $580. Now, you might have heard me talk about this before, but I personally am more of a fan of 1440p as a desktop resolution than 4K. I don't want to go through the rant all over again, but the bullet points there are essentially two main reasons. One is that Windows scaling really sucks, especially when you're using 4K. The 4K on a 55-inch TV, when displayed at its native resolution with absolutely no scaling, is impossibly tiny to see. Now do that on a 32-inch or a 27-inch display and it's impossible to see anything. And while Windows does have scaling built into it, where you can, double the scaling size so that a 4K display now looks more like a 1080p display, that only works so much as the apps that you're using support that. And if you've used Steam, if you've used any kind of application that is not standard, usually things like security camera software or programs that don't necessarily see a lot of revisions, you end up running into a lot of situations where the scaling is broken, and when the scaling just doesn't work with a program, it's impossible to use it. 1440p avoids a lot of that because the scaling, while it is better than 1080p so you can fit more things in there, it doesn't make everything impossibly tiny. And while it is a higher resolution than 1080p, it's not a doubling or a quadrupling of the performance needed to run it. It certainly will push your computer harder, but not as hard as 4K, and I would argue that the vast majority of people that are playing on 27 to 32-inch displays will not be able to tell the difference between 1440p and 4K. So all that is to say, I recommend you get this. Do not go with a 4K display. You will probably end up regretting it at some point if you're someone like me that uses a lot of different programs. If you exist only in the gaming world, it might be a fantastic experience, but again, can you tell the difference? And another thing is, at this point, do not get a VA display. Just get an IPS display. IPS displays are so cheap nowadays. Look at this. A 1440p IPS 165 hertz display for $180, and it has a built-in KVM. Look, if you're like me and you use multiple devices on your day-to-day life, having a KVM for your display is actually insanely good, and the fact that it's built into it and the display itself is only $180 is actually insane. And if you're willing to take a gamble with the Amazon used market here, you can get it for as low as $144. That's actually insane. actually insane. This is a great deal. This is like one of those things where I would recommend this to pretty much anybody because it's cheap enough that no matter what, it's going to be better than what you have right now. It really seems like the best deals you're going to be finding right now are going to be for accessories to go with your computer. So monitors, keyboards, mice, things like that are really where the sales seem to be at more so than the actual devices themselves. And with prices of everything kind of going sky high, it might be a good time to, instead of considering replacing your current device, maybe think about how you can prolong the life of it, just so you could ride out these kind of rough looking times in terms of price until things start to look a little bit better. You know, maybe you didn't see the discount that you wanted on a mini PC to get you to buy something new there, so maybe consider just going with a RAM upgrade instead, or even just upgrading your SSD storage. That way you have at least some kind of improvement to your day-to-day experience, but you're not breaking the bank here. Even getting a better display will make a bigger difference than a lot of the time something like a RAM upgrade, or even going with a faster CPU. You know, if you have a 60 hertz display right now, 144 hertz displays are so cheap nowadays that it's really worthwhile to upgrade towards that. Even if you can't take full advantage of that right now, that's perfectly fine. It'll still work at the lower refresh rates, but most people don't really upgrade their monitors all that frequently. You're probably going to keep that for the next 5 to 6 years. So if you upgrade your computer within the next year, you could suddenly take advantage of that. And no matter what, even if you have the worst computer in the world, chances are there is a game out there that you're going to be able to play at 144 hertz. There's a lot of indie games out there that run very smooth and really well on these high refresh rate displays, even if you're on integrated graphics. So dropping $100 to $120 on a high refresh rate display instead of spending $400 to $500 on a new computer might just be the best thing you could do for yourself. But anyways, let me know what you guys have picked up during Black Friday, if you've found any deals so far, or if you're waiting for the deals that are going to be happening tomorrow. But anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one.